basically, the longer you live in New York, at least my experience, I was more afraid to leave it, so you become more addicted to it or something. And so that's why when we moved to Poughkeepsie, it was a very strange experience.
In 2002 was 1 year after September 11th. So,
Yes.
And I think many people didn't want to necessarily be in the city. So it was also the right moment, perhaps, in a way.
Well, I didn't have a choice, I needed to find a different place to live. So that's why it wasn't so much that I wanted to leave, but I couldn't afford it. So, and then, moving to Poughkeepsie was, initially it was obviously a big change. And Jason, my husband, he said once, he said, I feel like I'm in witness protection. Because it was so, the neighborhood we were in, and we just felt, but it was, we did get broken into a couple of times, but fortunately nothing bad happened, so that was good. But it was a different enough place where I think major changes happened within my work, because I somehow that sort of that sort of feeling that you have when you're in New York, and it's a highly competitive city, and you're more absorbed with those kind of thoughts than when you're sort of then thinking about your work, at least for me. So I felt I think I mean, it didn't happen right away. About a year or two in, I realized that I was making choices within my I was working in a very small space. It was the back porch of the first place we moved into, and so it was sort of had windows around. But I made some really interesting sculpture there. So that's why I think it was worked out for me.
Amazing. Shall we start looking at the slide presentation you and I prepared? Oh, that would be wonderful. So these are photos from your studio. The wolf, certain animals, especially wolves, are recurrent motifs in your work. And if we go perhaps to the next slide and to the third, you want to say a bit about how you have arranged your studio now, and how you work with different materials and photographs and drawings and found objects and materials, just to give a bit of an impression.
These are the images that you showed are just off my drawing table, where I make sort of the smaller ink pastel sort of collage drawings, and that's why you see all these pictures of animals and dogs. I guess the relationship to to introducing the animals is because I guess I'm a dog lover and animal lover, and when I was young wanted to be a veterinarian but wasn't smart enough to do that. So
when did you know you wanted to be an artist? Was that just after wanting to be a vet?
Probably around the same time. I mean, one was like a passion for, because I had dogs all the time. But then my mother was an amateur artist, but very talented. And so, having her work in the house, some of her art books, and then things like that kind of, and I was sort of interested in that and, good at it. So maybe that was one of the reasons. And then I was good at art in school, and I felt like that's something that I wanted to pursue, but mainly because my parents encouraged me. They didn't say, no, this is like it'll be a failure or whatever. So
you grew
it's not a good idea.
You grew up in Karachi in Pakistan.
Yes.
And so this early years where you and I are nearly the same age. So you grew, these early years you describe are 60s and 70s.
Yes.
In Karachi. How is the art education there in school? Because you said I was good at it in school. Is that something that is an important class there, or is it encouraged?
Now much more so, and even in the past it was, but there's not much funding, from the state. And when I was in high school, at that time there was one art school, but it wasn't that, stimulating. Uh, and that was it. And then there was one in another city, but um, I had the opportunity to, go abroad to study. So that made a big difference. Um, in terms of, like, by the time I came to Rhode Island School of Design, I was 19, and I was, really excited to leave. It was just like, you're setting on you're beginning the adventure.
Yeah, perhaps we have a look at the next slide. So you started at RISD, I think in 1981 or something, right?
Yes.
Early 80s. And I always ask an artist when I visit what first pieces are. But as a teenager in high school and practicing, what did you do what was your practice when you were not yet at RISD? What did you do?
Well, I mean, I was a student. I mean, I was a high school student, so I was very into portraiture and drawing from life. And I was interested in Rembrandt, and I was also, because that's what we were being taught, some Dutch painting, and also I think in high school I got into Fauvism. I must have seen images, and so I was pretty much more sort of German expressionism, Cathy Kollwitz, people like that. And then I went to RISD, and out of which 1 year I spent in Rome, was my junior year, and that had a huge influence on me. And this piece was done a year after. I mean, I was back in Karachi. I'd finished studying and finished my BFA. And but by the time I graduated from RISD, I was very interested in assemblage and constructivism and Moholy-Nagy and Man Ray, and but then there was also a lot of what I had sort of absorbed from being in Rome for a year. So, and traveling around Italy, and then I remember going to Turkey, and I mean, my first trip to Turkey was then, and to Crete, and all these things were, I think it takes time to absorb all that and then sort of bring it together. But this was, I had majored in printmaking, so I had all these prints left, and I cut them up, and they're collaged onto this found piece of wood.
Beautiful, beautiful. Perhaps we go to the next. That's and to the next. And to the third. We have 3 of these. These are from the early mid-90s.
Yes, 94, 95, 96. These were, I think that, all through, without, like, I mean, all through the time that I was at RISD, I sort of forgot about portraiture. And then, I came back to it again in the mid-90s after doing some more figurative stuff. And, but I was very influenced by this movie, Mortal Kombat, which had these posters on my walk, on my way to work. I would every morning walk by this wall. Like that's what's really nice in New York. Everywhere they put up these different posters, and visually you get stimulated all the time, by different things. And so I wanted to make my own kind of, like, I was influenced by other kind of masks and from other places, and then also Halloween masks were a big deal to me at that time. And then so I these are sort of what I came up with. And I thought also, yes, these are very cohesive, and they'll be very commercial. And so it was my idea that, but I was very inspired, but that didn't happen. But they were definitely, an expression of how I was feeling. But
when
I like how, sorry?
When we first met, you talked very much about being interested in sci-fi movies, horror movies. And there was one interview I read where you basically, I think it was with Negar Azimi, where she talked about the idea of monsters. And we are looking, you said like Halloween masked, think about the idea of a monster. And you said, oh, if you think about Frankenstein creating the monster, I connect with a monster in a way. I thought that was such an interesting way of describing it.
Well, it's a very romantic way of sort of describing it, I guess, because, the monster is like this, beautiful, person, and the actual monster is Frankenstein. So that's what I sort of meant. But then it is true that, with the monster is a word that's, that we kind of, for me, you have to find like other ways of appreciating the monster. And for me, it has been a source of inspiration, in terms of because within horror and sci-fi, you are able to sort of deal with things that are supposed to be, those genres make it acceptable to sort of deal with imagery and with content that is unacceptable. So, and that kind of, allows me to. But from the early 90s, when I was very influenced by some horror and sci-fi movies that I saw, which definitely, because in those days they used to make puppets, for all the special effects. So in a way, I saw that as sort of something that I wanted to add to sort of how I would like approach my work, and so I had that. And then, so this image was taken by my friend, the artist Jennifer Bolandi, and she, would take, I think, she came over and she composed this because I had these small sculptures that I was working on, sitting on the table, and then because you asked me for an image and I don't have anything, and I remember that she had taken one of a grouping of them.
Yeah. Yeah, it was so interesting when you talked about monsters and Frankenstein and for, of course, when you say you connect with a monster, of course, I think in the original question, it was, of course, the artist as a creator and the artist as a sculptor, and making a body and sculpting a body, finding form. Perhaps we go to the next slide, because this is also, you have the tabletop, and here it's more like you're using very domestic materials here.
Yes, I always use materials that were sort of easily accessible, free, and discarded, because I think a lot of it had to do with not being able to afford to have things made, but I also, I guess, from an early point, there's a you connect to things in a surface way, like an influence of Arte Povera, or even that kind of slick fabrication really wasn't my of interest to me,
Mm-hmm.
But this piece was a breakthrough piece for me, because I realized when I did 2 or 3 simple gestures that I just had to stop, and that what I had considered before, that this is my process, I have to do this, and only after I do all of those will the piece be complete, And this for me was a piece that made me realize that no, this is where I stop right now and have to start reconsidering everything. So,
where is this piece right now, Huma? Do you know which collection it is?
it's in my collection.
It's incredible. Really an incredible piece, and thank you for
It was very influenced by Rauschenberg, who is a huge influence, and it'll come up again when you show some other slides, you know. But the chair was very much, yeah, sometimes things just work, and that's what I realized at that point, that, you know, I don't have to sort of overdo this, you know.
Yeah.
And it was telling me something, you know, so.
2000, so that's a piece 20 years ago. Let's go to the next.
And also the idea that, you know, in a way, this was opening up for me the idea of exposing the armature, which we'll see later.
Let's go to the next. Lipa, and perhaps we go back to this in a little bit, but first show some photos.
Yes. So when you asked me to, you know, give you some photos of Karachi, which I might have shown you some photos of shacks and things like that, the construction shacks. And then I realized that all the photos that because I'm not a photographer, but I only started doing it because I wanted to add photography to, you know, my sort of art making. And so, especially when you travel, so you can make sculpture, you can sort of create a, you know, a scene, and then, you know, and then you photograph it in a sort of way to create a cinematic narrative. And also you can't travel with the sculpture, so this is a way of documenting work in a different place. And then I also did a portfolio of photo etchings and woodcuts, which are called reconstructions, which were based on taking photographs in Karachi, and then drawing on those photographs, and then those were made into photogravures. So that sort of started me, gave me the idea that yes, I should document certain parts of the city that I sort of am obsessed with, and why, and, you know, and use those, you know, it was like art material. So
you described Karachi when I first visited you in the studio. You basically said at the time you were still going nearly every year for a while back to Karachi, and you described the city as very raw. And in the beginning, when you used to come back, it was basically a road and desert on both sides. So a lot of deserted, raw space. And a work like this, basically there is kind of an abandoned or not fenced off area. And you sculpt these 2 feet, and you sculpt something that looks like a torso or body that is affixed to the trees. Were these spontaneous interventions, or was they made to make the photo? Or how did this come about, something like this, Huma?
The area that I have used a lot in my sort of work is it's near the city beach, and there is property over there which is expensive property, but it's undeveloped. You know, it hasn't all been converted into homes and things like that. So I've been documenting it since like 2007. So, and it has changed. You know, you'll see some, like, parts of this area will have more houses and things. But my idea was to, you know, I had looked at photographs that other artists had done, you know, like Kiefer, and so I was thinking that, you know, I should, while I was in Karachi, spending, you know, a month there or whatever, also do some work. And so I made these feet, because the idea of the feet without the body originally was, I think it was in the 90s sometime, I saw this movie, and it was a kind of like a comedy horror sort of movie, and there's a scene where this guy gets blown up, and the only thing left are these white high top sneakers, really nice ones, and then bloody ankles coming out of it. So it was like an image that stayed with me, that, somehow, and then, when I made this piece, it had become something of a common practice in other places, where there was a lot of, roadside bombings going on, stuff like that. I mean, at least in my head, there were multiple sort of connections that one can make to that. And so I made these feet out of, I used my mother's actually old sandals, and then just kind of sculpted them. And we drove around and then found this spot which was by the road. I tried burning them unsuccessfully because it was too windy, but then I just that figure, that shape that you see behind was actually a shirt of
Yeah.
somebody's that somehow was stuck on this dry tree, and but it looks like almost like a figure, which is, or part of it or something. And it was something that I noticed later on, because I was too busy like trying to place the feet there and get it all right, so it wasn't too windy to photograph it. And that's when I noticed that. But I mean, I think that I like this photo a lot.
Yeah,
And so this is another example of. So I had made this the first version of the sculpture, which I showed in a two-person show at Momenta in 2002. And then I went to Mexico and I did some photographs over there again, because this sculpture is, it can be assembled and then taken apart. So you can travel with it. And so that's when it gave me the idea, because I was starting to do I was going back to Karachi, and I wanted to sort of have more things to do. And so this was another series. I only sent you one image, but there's another three.
Remember when you first showed that 2002 at Momenta, and we started talking, and you basically, I correct me if I'm wrong, but I kind of remember that when you have clay, you of course have to cover the clay with plastic or something so it's not drying. So you were sculpting the hands and you kept the rest of the clay under the trash bag, so to say. And then at some point you realized, oh, it's not only keeping the remaining clay dry, but it also, it became part of the sculpture.
Yes, well, this is, I showed that sculpture, I made that sculpture around like early 2002. And I had gone to Mexico with Jason and another friend, Chris Hammerline, and we were working in this room, in this hotel suite. They had both gone there to do fabrication, but Chris was getting big bags of clay delivered to the room. And then, there was a Rodin book, and, most of the time you're just sitting around, talking, or, and he was always making stuff. And I said, well, I've never tried clay. And the one time I did, it wasn't a very successful sort of example of anything. So I he showed me, because he was going to fire it. So he showed me how to do it so that the piece doesn't crack. And I tried it out then, and I sort of liked the feel of it. And I realized that why don't I, when I go back to New York, I'll try out clay, introduce that into the work. And so while I was good at making hands, so I started with the hands, but then I had a whole sort of armature for the body figured out, and I was starting to add clay, cover it up with the black plastic like I'd seen it in Mexico. And then more and more at a certain point, it started to resemble like a body which was forming underneath, but at the same time, I didn't need to show that either, and the black plastic was as important as anything else. And it was something I'd never used before. And, so that's why I thought it would be mysterious, but at the same time, very sort of much about, it's a very emotional sculpture, but it's yeah, and the idea that in the first one there was a different kind of tail, and in this version is when I realized that the clay that is coming out from the front should also be, it's almost like there is, if I add a tail to it, I'll be adding some movement to it too, and at the same time it could also refer to part of the landscape, because I saw the plinth as a landscape for the first time.
When I first saw it, 2002, that was just a year after September 11th. I also thought about body bags, of course, because there is a body partially covered, and you think about that. And then you and I worked on installing this in 2005, and you added the tail, and it became really from 2002 until now a very important recurrent motif for you that you expose. When we go back one slide and you see you have it here in the landscape, we go back to the front to the pedestal that we just, and then we will see throughout the presentation that this is recurring.
Well, the interesting thing was that, when you asked me to be in the show, and you wanted me to show this work, I was obviously, it was great that you felt it was important, and I do feel it's a very important work for me. And then the response to it was, there was no response. But then I've met people, 7-8 years later, and they remember the piece, because it was never mentioned in anything at that point, but I didn't expect it to be, because I think it is a heavy piece, and my experience in the art world is that, when I realized that work that deals more with identity and ethnicity is much more digestible in some ways, than work which comments on militarism, and sort of things like that. So, but what was interesting was that, you asked me about the Saatchi show earlier, and the next year was the Saatchi show, and I was actually asked to make another version of it. He commissioned it. So that, and when it was shown there, there was a different response to the work, and it was so. But then after that, I basically, I felt like it was done until 2017, when I was asked to do the commission for the Metropolitan roof, and I was thinking of what to do, and after visiting the roof, and I always thought of this piece as a piece that if I ever had the opportunity, that it would be nice on a much larger scale, as a monument,
Yeah, we have beautiful pictures. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's fine.
We have beautiful pictures of exactly that installation you're describing. Perhaps we go to the next one, Huma. And just to show a bit chronological what you're working on, we go to the next.
This is from the series of prints.
And is this
also like the beach near Karachi with I like photographing sort of, where nobody was, and like also where there's construction going on. So you can see all the construction materials, which are sort of very related to, in a sense, the landscape. I mean, when I said that, but when I was growing up, the area that which you described was like, desert on each side and road. But then it got developed and it became really ugly, like sort of ugly, sort of 80s architecture, but not attractive at all. But this is kind of part of that, but that's what is also interesting and sort of weird about Karachi, where it is a city of almost 20 million people.
Are you still going every year?
Yes, I was actually there in February.
Oh, wow.
And made it back safely. At that time, everybody was talking about Corona, but it wasn't nobody was taking it seriously.
Let's perhaps go to the next slide. This is the Orientalist here in the park. And if we go to the next slide, we have a very beautiful detail of this. And at some point, you mentioned to me that the marks of the making, when you have, we will see that more in your sculptures. I think very often in your materials, if it's a bronze cast or if it's styrofoam or it's cork or it's here, you see basically all the marks of the procedure and the practice that led you to the work. Do you want to say a little bit about how you're putting material together and how you're forming so that a face like this comes into existence?
Well, if you go back to the other, the full, yes, you can see that I mean, for me, like going back and forth, you know, within the traditions of historical figurative sculpture, it's essential, it's a sort of essential feature. And I was looking at a lot of, you know, these stacked stone sculptures from Angkor Wat. And you see these big blocks of stone that are stacked on top of each other, and then they sort of, you know, carve the face out. And because of erosion and stuff, those, you know, cracks sort of appear more so that they show where the stone was attached and stacked. So that idea of using my found material and like found foam and other objects and then stacking them and then sort of assembling them together, and then on top of that adding the clay. It's that what I'm also interested in is, I'm a very formal artist, so obviously everything is in relationship to the next move, or you know what I just did. And but at the same time, it's like you see also the relationships between the material itself when next to each other, and those kind of relationships are sometimes what determines where do you kind of let something be exposed, and where do you cover something else up. And I mean, each sort of modeling mark can sort of tell another story also. So.
Mm-hmm. So perhaps we go back to the face. It was so beautifully explained. Thank you. And let's go to the next one and to the next, just to give an overview. You want to say a bit about this, because this feels, that's the work 1000.
Yes. Oh, okay. So I've been interested in making sarcophagus or sarcophagi sculptures for some time now, and there was one I made in 2007. I think that was my first one, which was like called The Immortal Story. And then this is sort of like the second one where I was interested in the idea of, because I like to have pedestals to go with my sculptures, and it's even more, it's better when the pedestal is actually completely interactive with the work. So you can imagine that this work could actually travel inside that, like Dracula crossing the sea, you know, that would be its crate. And I mean, these are the kind of thoughts I sometimes have, you know, it's like, okay, so, but so it is a carcass, but then a lot of the graffiti that you see, which is again, there is graffiti on the sculpture too. And that comes from obviously looking at artists like Christopher Wool, and how he uses it, and you know how beautifully, I mean, he's the idea of graffiti has become like abstract painting. And then Joyce Pensato, and then also real graffiti artists also who are, I mean, now you don't see so much beautiful graffiti anymore because it's people hire people to make things now, where the neighborhoods, I mean, in Poughkeepsie, empty walls that belong to landlords are asking people to come and do this graffiti. But it's not on the level as before, when it was an act of, sort of opposition, And so in Pakistan also, there's very interesting graffiti. All the walls are usually, people come, but it's different. It could be religious, and it could be people selling their various wares, like I'm a carpenter, I can do this, But the people that actually do the writing for them are also artists, because they know different kinds of calligraphy in Urdu. So they show that off too. So that's kind of interesting. And then you also see political graffiti a lot. So I even saw a show of it. So it was very much in my mind when I started to. And then, of course, artists like Sterling Ruby, how beautifully they deal with the, idea of the modernist pedestal, and how do you sort of, but for me, it was also like, how do I interact that with the work? And which is completely figurative. So
And
yeah.
And the materiality, of course, because if we go one slide further, I think here is the work Ghosts of Human Kindness, which is an outdoor sculpture, and it looks like it is made out of styrofoam. And so it was originally, you put it together out of styrofoam and then made a bronze cast out of it. Am I correct with the procedure? I'm sure I'm not exactly describing it.
No, that's correct. I mean, even the Orientalist was made out of, styrofoam and clay and found wood and wire. And what I like is that, in that one, the patina is different, but every material, you can pick up on every single detail that is in the original material that's used. So, but again, whenever you go from one medium into the next, there is a different kind of transformation that takes place that alters the work. And in this case, what happens is that, I think a lot of people thought this is stacked styrofoam. So you go up to it and you feel like, I'm just going to push it and it'll all come falling down. And actually it's incredibly heavy, so, but also what's interesting is I did want it to look like it was literally just flimsily stacked, even though it's all attached. I attached it with glue and before I took it over to the foundry. And then you see a little crushed paper bag over there. And then that loop is something that I was using in my other sculptures, and it's almost like a bag, or some kind of skin that is there.
For me, sculpture, I always walk around it. So I create a relation to my own body in time and space to walk around it and feel my height or the time that I spent walking around it. But it's also, I always wonder what the weight of a sculpture is. I once made a proposal at the museum that every label for a sculpture should have the weight on it. This was next to a sculpture that looked like cork, like sculpted cork, which was also bronze. So two very, very light materials, cork and styrofoam, made into two outdoor sculptures out of bronze.
And the other one that you were mentioning, the one that was next to it on the left of it, the cork sort of transforms into bronze, but then ends up looking almost like this kind of molten lava rock-like sort of surface, which is interesting.
Is weight important for you as one of the dimensions of your work?
Not really. I mean, the weight, psychologically maybe would be more interesting, but I always have tried to make, except for the bronzes, the work is light so that I can move it and lift it around myself and pack it myself. And, it was something from a long time ago,
Yeah. Let's go perhaps and see some of the installation shots. And the next one.
Oh, this is one of the few drawings for a sculpture.
This is Thought and Scribe. Is this inspired by the Louvre, by the sculpture in the Louvre?
Yes, and also, you know, there are versions of Thought and Scribe in almost every museum that has an Egyptian collection. And I've seen like different ones in different books, you know, tiny miniature ones and like life size. And so this was a study that had to be done for a proposal for being in the Triennale, which Okwi and Visor curated in 2012. And I'd been waiting for some time, say like what, 5-6 years, because I had used plexiglass in a very early piece called Magic Carpet, where it felt like the carpet was hovering because the base was plexi. And I could only afford to make that size plexi at that time because it's expensive to fabricate. And then later on for this, you know, by that time, I was ready to sort of, and also a lot of, you know, a lot of artists use plexi in many interesting ways, you know, so I didn't want to, I never got a chance to do it till this sculpture, where I was interested in making my version of Thought and Scribe. And usually I don't look at a specific sculpture and sort of try to recreate it. But in this one, I did. And but I realized that this was an opportunity to really, like the way Egyptians are sort of portrayed in movies and stuff, you know, there's always some kind of sci-fi element to them, you know, and to movies that deal with ancient Egypt. And so the idea of like a plexi base where almost felt like it would have like a spaceship or some kind of futuristic element to it, but I have followed the way it is in some of the sculptures and drawings. And then this is also an homage to sort of minimalism and then to John Chamberlain, whose works I, you know, admire. And so that is my sort of crushed figurative sort of homage to Chamberlain. And there's also, you know, Francis Bacon was very interested in pedestals, and, you know, in his, you see how in his paintings, you know, they're always, it feels like the bed is like the pedestal, or within that, you know, there are pedestals within pedestals, or anyway, that's how he breaks up the space. And I liked his, very earlier on, I'd seen one of his baboon monkey paintings in the Peggy Guggenheim Museum in Venice, which was a big influence, where it's very centralized image with just in a field of color. So, and then, so here, so there's Thought, which is like my sort of two-faced I mean, there are 3 faces to this one too. And then the Scribe is basically reclining. And then there's a little moon shape in the back, which sometimes appears in Egyptian sculpture.
Such a beautiful piece. Perhaps we go to the next briefly to just stay in the chronology, but then go to the next. And the next, I don't claim that I had this idea. I have to give Eva Raspini credits, who did a very beautiful book here, They Live, from the ICA show. I'm just showing this right now to everybody. It's a beautiful book if you can get it. And I remember when I first came to the studio and looked at your drawings, and for me, the first, we talked about Francis Bacon. So for me, this is actually more about Francis Bacon. And in your book, there is this beautiful juxtaposition with Monk. But I do think, and I put this into the slide presentation, because I do think that the work on the left, your work, is an incredibly strong visualization. It's an incredibly strong work. Do you want to talk a little bit about Bacon and Monk in a way? Because you're very generous in you have already mentioned Rauschenberg, you have mentioned Basquiat, you have mentioned John Chamberlain, you're very generous in Sterling Ruby, or you look at art, and you also talk about other artists. But I think for me, this is one of, actually this work on paper is one of my favorite works of yours, basically.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, it's inspiring to sort of get, I mean, I look at them so that, I'm able to make, certain decisions and, yeah, I mean, and I'm inspired by the work. So that's why it makes me make these kind of drawings. But with Monk and with Francis Bacon, it's like, there's always something that you can see in it, which is what's interesting about certain kinds of art, where every time you look at it, you see something different in it, and it'll open up something else for you. And when you go back to do something, that thought will be there. And I mean, I always try to make the work not look derivative of somebody. So I wanted to look like my work, but a lot of times there are colors, or I mean, even in the first image that you showed of my studio, there's a pink drawing on which I was working on. And that one also very much relates to the Scream, which is an image that it just opens up so much for every artist, I think. But as I was mentioning to you earlier, when I saw his retrospective in Madrid, and he had such a tragic life till like much later, that the work was just unbelievably strong, and then when his life became better, and he wasn't so sad anymore, so tortured by his, the loss of his family and everything, something, I mean, the work was still beautiful, but something was lost, which was there before. There was I mean, I think anxiety does produce certain kinds of ways of expression, which I think work for me too.
Yeah. I'm so happy we had a moment to spend looking at this incredible work. Let's go perhaps to the next.
Yeah, so I was mentioning before that, I started to draw on photographs mainly because I was working on these prints, this portfolio of prints, and I realized that I liked the idea of drawing on photographs because it sort of reminded me of other people's work I'd seen, and that's when I started taking photographs in Karachi. So after I finished the prints, it was actually Peter Bloom who encouraged me to go larger, not like, the 8.5 by 11. I'm just going to shift this way because the sun is coming into my eyes. So so basically he said, encouraged me to be a little bit more ambitious with the dimensions and of the work photos I was working on. So this is 80 inches by 50 inches, and I started to go from using the figure in the earlier works on photographs back to, again, portraiture. And in this one, I mean, I've always used collage, and a friend of mine several years ago gave me a High Times magazine. It was a classic edition or something, and I had never really looked at a High Times properly, and then I realized they have these beautiful centerfolds, and the centerfolds always have these black backgrounds. So I started cutting them out and using them almost like the idea was that, they were very, like these kind of big weed buds that were floating in space, and then you're looking at them, but the spatial, the way they create space within the actual drawing is also interesting because of the different paper that it's on. And, they look good, so.
Let's go to the next one.
Yes, this one also has the weed buds for the eyes, because I just thought that's you know, they added a different kind of, it's almost like you're looking through a window.
Yeah, absolutely. Just in the interest of time, so we still have some time left to talk about the following installations. Let's go to the next.
Yes, so this is With Blows, which is which I made for Venice Biennale in 2015, and then it was shown in the ICA show. You know, I've been these cork figures have sort of developed more and more, and I still keep. I mean, I keep enjoying how much I mean, making them is still fun for me, and because there are so many different possibilities within the combinations of the cork and the styrofoam and then the painting. So there, I can keep changing it around, you know, and keep coming with, I hope, you know, interesting work with this.
Yeah, what an incredible sculpture. Perhaps we go to the next.
Yes, this one I would describe as, you know, H.R. Geiger meets Judd and then meets Victor Hugo, you know. So it's like there's a sort of Victor Hugo Gothic ruin full of blood at the bottom. And but anyway, that is this one is also a sarcophagus, and yeah. What else can I say about it?
The sarcophagus, and I liked the fact when you said that you carry around pieces and you want them light, and you carry it with the prostrating figure. You brought this to Mexico, and when you talked about the work 2000 as a sarcophagus, you said, oh, the figure could actually be in it, like in a coffin.
Yes, I mean, that's why it's a nod to sort of minimalism, but at the same time, it is also, you know, it could function as that, or for me, it does, you know, in terms of it's a sarcophagus plinth, but usually the bodies are always on top, you know. So
yeah, let's go to the next.
Yeah, these are. I mean, I've been doing these drawings for a while. I think it was around 2013 that I started adding collage material, which was specifically wildlife calendar images and dogs and wolves, and trying to make that human-animal connection, you know, working, because it seems to be, yeah, I mean, they are a lot of fun to make, but they do sort of also talk about that kind of anxiety about the ecological system breaking down. You know.
Yeah, the ecological system breaking down, you and I had a lot of conversations about this, and the idea of beings, because it's the corks, the styrofoam, the monster, the fragile animal. So there is a certain fragility that the mark making or leaving marks is very important in your work. Let's go perhaps to the next just briefly, and just to show the broad variety of your practice. But coming back to the topic, we looked at this in the very beginning, Benam.
Yes, it means without name, yeah, or unnamed.
And then if we go to the next.
Yes, we come in peace.
We come in peace is a quote from The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Yes.
I had to look that up. I'm not so good in movies, in movie titles, in movie quotes. But this is very much when you say the ecological breakdown or the political breakdown, I always felt this was very either pre or post apocalyptical.
Yeah, it's interesting that I think somebody also, I think it was described as reverse ruins in a way, relating to, because of the way that it connects with the background of the skyscrapers and the cranes, and somehow the colors seem to also connect. you know, almost like Smithson's ruins.
Ice is a premonition of ruins or built on ruins.
But it's also like a first encounter. But then at the same time, when I envisioned it, because I like to think of my sort of installations in a somewhat theatrical, dynamic sort of way, where, you know, the sculptures are actors and where they are is the stage, and the city is the stage. The Central Park, having the summer stage there, was kind of like something you know, it made me think. And then I didn't want to have anything else, no tables, chairs, or anything. It was just like a landing pad where these two sort of beings had landed, you know. And
how tall is Benham in this version? Because when we first did it like 20 years ago, it was literally on the pedestal, perhaps 2 or 3 feet. It was not very tall. How tall is this version?
The original versions are based on, you know, on a 6-foot person, you know, crouching. So this is approximately 4 feet high, I think. Yeah, at the top of the back, you know, is approximately 4 feet, but it's about 16.5 feet long. Because the figure that it's, you know, bowing down or prostrate next to is 12 feet tall. And if this figure, you know, stood up, it would be taller, you know. But the interesting thing that I felt in this work, I mean, coming up with the idea to have this kind of, you know, just two sculptures were enough, because the roof is not that big. And they're actually 2 examples of my work. And when you put them together in a completely different setting, it creates a whole other sort of conversation between them, and how they connect to each other, even though the materiality and the way that they are put together is different. One is assembled and the other one is carved. So
let's go to the next one to just give one more view of this. The standing figure has, like, if I remember correctly, like 5 faces, right?
yes, one face is sort of at an angle, and the other 4 are, you know, on the side, on each side.
What inspires you for this multiplicity of double-headed, triple-headed, quintuple-headed? What?
Well, I think that very much, I mean, I was always interested in the 2-headed Janus, but then also in Hindu sculpture, there's Vishnu and Shiva and others that have multiple heads. And I mean, the inspiration for something like this does come from, like, you know, also like Coatlicue in Mexico, which is the monumental sculpture that's in front of the museum. And then also Balzac, which is a big favorite of mine. And, you know, Predator from the movies, or, you know, or even, I mean, it's corny to say, but like there's movies like Gods of Egypt, you know, which is like a contemporary crappy movie. But I like the idea of the god. I mean, he's Australian, I think. But anyway, he's, you know, he's supposed to be like 15 feet tall, also much tall. The idea of the scale change, you know, of how they do it in that. So there are various things I'm looking at or thinking about in terms of how to get the sort of feeling of the weight and the immensity of this piece. Even though it's only 12 feet, I mean, there are sculptures that we see that are much, much bigger, but it's also the handling and the mark making and the colors and everything else which pull you to it, and it feels bigger than it actually is.
Yeah, that's a reason I wanted to ask again, because looking at the pictures already, it evokes a certain height. We Come in Peace as a title. We Come in Peace as an installation. How did you feel about the reception of the work on the Met Roof?
I mean, I thought it, you know, I couldn't complain. It was good, you know, and it was well reviewed, and, you know, And then I went there a few times to meet different people, and it was great to see children like running around it and sort of making the different poses. And they didn't seem to be fearful of the monsters, you know. I mean, I like that kind of response where you think it's natural to see something like this, you know.
It felt very monumental and very humble at the same time. And especially then, of course, with this beautiful title. But of course, very, very uncanny thinking about the city and what a museum is built upon. So perhaps we go to see the last slide.
Yes, this one is this work is called Profit and Loss, and it was made for a show that I had in Rome last year. And in many ways, it's, you know, I've worked with feet a lot and hands, but I wanted to go back to the hands. And so it was also an homage to the broken Constantine in the Capitoline Museum, you know, where you have his head and his hands and his feet. And so it's a favorite museum of mine. And I always, I mean, the few times that I've been there, I like to go, but I remembered it from my first visit to Rome. But the idea of, again, using the plexi, which I like to use it as a, you know, as a base, but if you were to see them in the installation in Rome, the idea was also that in this case, the plexi bases are activating the hands and creating an illusion that they are part or they belong to an invisible giant that's crawling, you know. So in the show in Rome, they were the first pieces that you encountered. So it was a procession of sculptures, and these two were almost like leading the procession. So that's how I saw them.
Are you a spiritual person, Huma?
I hope so. Yes, I mean, you know, one tries to be, you know.
Because I always perceived your work to be about vulnerability, but vulnerability in a utopian way. So by the work being present, actually the future is going to be better. Like We Come in Peace. I like the title so much because it suggests the future in a way. But you have the marks on the work, so you have the body bag in Benham, or you have the marks on the cork and the styrofoam. And so there's also always, I consider your work very hopeful, but I never know if it's actually also witnessed something of a destruction and something of being heard in a way. What are you working on right now, Huma?
I mean, the work is very much informed by the present, and it's very much about the present. So because the present is, you know, incredibly scary, you know, there's lots, it's not yeah. But, you know, one keeps hoping. Right now I'm working on, I'm doing a show next year with Salon 94 in their new space. So I'm working on a lot of bronze sculptures, and but more the sort of medium and smaller. And the space is a very interesting space, but I will hope that you'll be able to see it, you know.
I'm so much looking forward to it. I'm so much looking forward to that. Thank you, Huma. This was so incredible to learn so much more about your work. Thank you.